Live.
Hello everyone and welcome to this Biovica company presentation where during the next hour we'll go through the company presentation with the focus on our upcoming US launch. And at the end of the session there will be a Q&A session. You'll be able to submit questions and you can do this using the functionality in your Teams client, as seen here in the picture. And if you want to remain anonymous, don't forget to check that checkbox, which will make you post the question anonymous. And I will answer the question during the meeting, at the end of the meeting. Today will be me, Anders Rylander, and my colleague Warren Cresswell, who will be presenting. And I'll just say a few words about my background before handing it over to Warren. So my name is Anders Rylander. I am the CEO of the company. I have a background within consulting, many years as senior manager at Accenture, a few years as CTO at ICA before starting my entrepreneurship journey as the co-founder of management consulting company Axelman. We also was active within investments, and as an investor I got in contact with Biovica, was very attracted by the company and the potential for improving the lives for cancer patients, as well as the big commercial potential. So me and my partner at the time made an investment, and a few years later I was asked if I could join as the CEO. At the time we had the first clinical results which were positive. So I made a decision to make a change and became the CEO of Biovica. So I'm also a major shareholder as well as the CEO of the company. That's a little bit about my background. And if we turn over to Warren, maybe you could introduce yourself, Warren, before we move on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anders. So my name is Warren Cresswell. I'm the president of Biovica in the Americas. I've been with the company for just over a year. I come with about 25 years of both diagnostic and pharmaceutical experience. Prior to joining Biovica, I was the CEO of a company called Prometheus Laboratories, which was a Nestle Health Science company. We developed and commercialized multi-analyte algorithm-based tests. Prior to that, I ran some business for DACO. DACO I was at for nearly 17 years. So I was a country manager, I ran corporate accounts. I actually started my career off in the laboratory, so I have quite a bit of experience from both the device side of things, the service side of things, 510K, PMAs, CLIA lab, along with the pharmaceutical industry.
All right. Thank you, Warren. There you go. Thank you, Warren. So the agenda for the presentation today is an introduction by me about the company and the product. I'll also talk about the market potential. Then Warren will talk about the US go-to-market strategy and plan. And then I'll summarize before we go to the Q&A session. And I think our presentation will be around 40 minutes, so it will be about 20 minutes for the Q&A session. So the company is based on research that was performed many years ago at the Uppsala University, and the company was founded in 2009. Our headquarters is still in Uppsala, but we now have established ourselves with a headquarters and the lab in San Diego, US, where also Warren and his team, or at least a large part of his team, is located. We have been traded on Nasdaq First North Premier since a couple of years, and we IPO'd in 2017. We have, when it comes to regulatory approvals, CE labeling for Europe since quite some time, and now recently we received the 510K clearance for a product for the US market, which we'll come back to in the presentation. If we look at the product is called DiviTum and it can measure cell proliferation from a simple blood test. And as you all know, cell proliferation is very important for us humans, especially so when it comes to cancer that grows through uncontrolled cell proliferation. So with DiviTum, we can provide very important information for the treating physician, both before and during treatment. And our key application that we are targeting is monitoring of metastatic cancer. So we're able to follow the patient over time and provide a quick feedback if the treatment is efficient or not. Currently, these patients are being monitored as standard using imaging. And with DiviTum, we can provide a simpler tool. In that sense, it's simpler to get the test taken, and we can provide quicker feedback. And this is something we've shown also in clinical trials, where we can see that we can discover progression up to almost 3 months ahead of imaging. So here we have something which we believe is superior to what's being used today. And this is, of course, important, especially so for the patients, making sure either that the treatment is effective or if get a warning sign that it is not, and you can then do something about it. There are a lot of treatment options for these patients, especially within the metastatic breast cancer area, which is our first application area, where there are many different treatment options, and the standard treatments initially being used are priced at more than $10,000 per patient a month, and also have some severe side effects. So really important to make sure that the treatment is effective. 510(k) clearance is something that we got after several years working towards that goal, and that's from the US FDA authority. This means that we now are allowed to market and sell the product in US for clinical use, US being the #1 market in terms of importance and volume for Biovica. This also the FDA created a unique code for DiviTum, which we also think is a key strength for us. The reason being so is that there are no similar products approved for cell proliferation from a blood test at the US market, and this enables us to differentiate the product against other solutions available out there. Another key strength in the 510(k) clearance is the strong negative predictive value. That means that the patient being under the cutoff measured with our assay has a very high likelihood of responding to the treatment within the next 30 days. And 30 days was chosen due to that's the treatment schedule for the products that we are complementing with this product within the breast cancer area. And that also in the next bullet, monthly testing means that we are testing monthly, as I said, because the treatments are given monthly for the first 6 months. And if the patient is still responding well, then you will do quarterly testing until there's progression, and then you go back to monthly testing. And this is also supported in the intended use. This is also assumptions that we made when estimating the market potential that we'll come to later on. And it's also a broad intended use, allowing for that market potential that we have identified. So that's also important. So we're very, very happy with the outcome of the 510(k) process, which now allows us to take the next step and launch the product for the US market. So there's not only benefits for the patient and also the treating physician, it's also for the healthcare providers and the ones that are going to pay for the treatments. And in US, with an insurance-based system, the payers are to some extent health insurance companies, but also the public part of the healthcare system. And we've done work within this field as well, health economic analysis. Here's a budget impact model that was presented about a year ago, and it's also been published. It was performed by researchers at the Fred Hutchinson University, and they looked at the health economic impact using DiviTum based on the clinical data, which I'll show you on the next slide, that we already have developed. And the conclusion is that there are savings to be made, 3 times the cost for the product, and we've assumed a $400 average price for DiviTum per test. So we can see that we validate the price level, and that's also been validated in advisory boards with payers. This is, of course, also an important aspect of the product, that it can provide positive health economy for the healthcare providers. So generating data that proves the value of the product, that's a key element of our go-to-market strategy and a kind of a foundation for all other activities. And it's something that's very important now to generate the demand and sales uptake after the launch of the product. Here's a summary of what we have achieved so far, and we have additional studies ongoing that will further strengthen this set of data. So to date, we have 24 of these clinical trials that has been performed with leading academic institutes, where they have provided biobanks and information about the patients. We performed tests with our assay blinded, so we haven't have insight to the disease state for the patient, and then it's been published by the academic partner. This is also very important to us, that it's not us being the center of the message, it's been these leading academic institutes within this field. This is a way for us to reach out with a message in this community, and also with a high level of trustworthiness. And if you look at the results of these articles, we can see that there's a clear pattern that we are prognostic, or DiviTum is prognostic in the early phase, prognostic for the risk for recurrence, and in the metastatic phase, the risk for progression, but also for overall survival. And as I said, when we have had access to serial samples, being able to follow the patients over time during treatment, we've shown that we can provide quick feedback on treatment efficiency, which is the application that we are now launching the product to be used for. And as we just mentioned, there is also both health economic publications, but also editorial articles summarizing all these results, especially with the breast cancer area. And also the breast cancer area, as you can see, are the dominating area where we have the majority of clinical trials, as that's our first area, our first focus area. But as you can see, there is proof of concept also outside of the breast cancer area. Some of these partners and collaborating partners are some of the world-leading institutes in the world. In US, we can mention both Washington University and Mayo Clinic, where we have done several clinical trials together with them. And we also worked with Dana-Farber since many years. We're now doing a trial with Johns Hopkins, etc. So we have been able to get a really strong buy-in from the leading key opinion leaders within this field. And the reason for that is, of course, that they see the benefits for the patient with our product. Same thing in Europe. It all started with Karolinska. We also have worked with the breast cancer group in Europe, like the Big Against Breast Cancer and IBCSG. And they're important from that perspective that they are covering several countries. So we get a great reach by working with those groups. Moving on to the market potential. We have identified several key markets, the US market being the first, and the second tier is the top European and the Nordic countries, and the third market we're looking at is the Japanese market. And if you look at the market potential estimates, those are based on the market research that we've been performing since many years. We have, as I said, done assessment on the price level based on the value that the product can provide by interviewing payers. We've also defined the testing schedule after several advisory workshops with oncologists and clinical trials also, and that was also now supported by our intended use in the 510(k) clearance. And that, together with the number of patients living with the disease, is what's behind these market potential estimates. Moving on to the more long-term roadmap, you can see that the breast cancer area, that's our first, but not the last area that we want to commercialize the product within, as there's potential to support patients being on treatment in other areas as well. We can mention locally advanced breast cancer, which is very adjacent step, very similar to metastatic breast cancer, as these treatments being used within the metastatic area is expanding into the locally advanced. And if you look outside of the breast cancer area, we have identified 3 areas which are focus areas for Biovica due to the diagnostic unmet need that we see and the treatments being used within these areas. These are metastatic malignant melanoma, where we have presented data together with Karolinska on checkpoint inhibitors, a very interesting area to expand into and support patients within that area as well. And the 2 others are non-small cell lung cancer and castrate-resistant prostate cancer. And that, of course, significantly increases the market potential. And the goal for Biovica is, when we enter a market, is to realize 15% of the market potential 3 years after launch of the product, which we think is an ambitious but doable goal with all the clinical data and the sales team and the product that we have. And we'll come back to the sales team and the strategy. We also have one last area on this slide, which I'll shortly want to mention, and that's the collaborations that we have with pharma. So the clinical results and the data that we have published has not only generated interest from key opinion leaders and oncologists, but also from pharma. And that's because with our assay, we can provide value for pharma performing development of new cancer therapies or expanding use of existing cancer therapies within the initial area. So we have 10 agreements with pharma and several projects ongoing where we support them in this process. And our ambition is to further develop these collaborations and enter into co-development projects that will result in new products for Biovica, supporting new therapies for pharma. So that's an exciting area for the future as well. So that was a little bit about the company, the product, and the market potential. I'd like to now hand it over to Warren San Diego. And please, Warren, if you can take us through the US market and our go-to-market plan to enter that market. Warren, please.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anders. If you can advance the slide, please, that would be great. Great. So our go-to-market strategy here in the US is really derived from years of experience in the diagnostic market with a number of different colleagues that have been very successful in this area. You know, pre-launch, the things that we really focus on, one of which is really understanding the market, and the market in the US versus other markets are slightly different. So it's really important that we understand the unmet clinical need and the clinical pathways here in the US, and this is what we've been focusing on and studying, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The other thing what we've done is, this is back maybe 6-9 months, is we've really been recruiting our customer-facing team. So what we want to make sure is that we have the highest caliber people, which we have found, made offers to, and they've accepted. These team members are people that I have worked personally with in the past and are very high caliber. The third thing is the selling process, is making sure that we own that selling process. If we took a different approach to our go-to-market strategy, let's say, and sold kits directly to distributors, we would lose the ability to really manage the complete selling process. So I'll talk a bit about that as well. Also, reimbursement. We want to make sure that we maximize reimbursement. There's many different channels to be able to get paid. And we want to make sure as well that we protect customers from very large bills. So we want to make sure that we charge a fair amount for the product, that we do drive value, and that most importantly, we do get paid as well. And lastly is we are running this organization through our own laboratory. So it's a CLIA laboratory, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So Anders, if you can advance the slide. Right. So with respect to market research, it's really important that we understand the patient journey. And as Anders had mentioned before, really our focus is on the patients that are the metastatic breast cancer patients that are hormone positive, HER2 negative, post-menopausal patients. Some of these patients may have had some genetic testing, and that would be more addressed in probably second-line therapy. And I think one of the most notable things here is that 27% of these patients survive at least 5 years. So it's incredibly important that these patients are closely managed, that they're on the right therapy, that they have all the right diagnostic tests being used to make sure that that overall survival can be extended with these patients. From a clinical intervention perspective, unlike if a patient has ductal carcinoma in situ, where surgery is actually the treatment, in a case of metastatic breast cancer patients, surgery is not a treatment, and in fact, it's not used often. Since metastatic breast cancer is not curative, really what physicians are trying to do is really prolong the overall survival of the patient. So surgery is used on occasion, but it's not the core therapy or treatment, should I say, for metastatic breast cancer. And same goes with radiation. Really, radiation is used primarily for palliative care. So this is where maybe you'd have a symptomatic lesion, such as a tumor on a spine or things of that nature, where you would use radiation to try to really reduce the pain the patient is having. So the real option here is the therapeutic option. And we're very, very lucky that a drug called CDK4/6, a class of drugs in CDK4/6, there's 3 primary drugs. Those are administered first-line therapy with endocrine therapies, and they're very efficacious. They're very tolerable. First-line treatment, doctors put these patients on, and they want to keep these patients on those therapies as long as possible. If you take a look at Kaplan-Meier curves, the progression-free survival is typically around 24 months, which means half of those patients don't make it 24 months until they have to switch therapies. The other half make it longer than 24 months. But being able to be on a well-tolerated drug that's highly effective for 24 months is a huge benefit for this particular patient type. Once the patients fail that therapy or no longer respond to that therapy, then they would go on a second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line, and so on. Typically, third line is chemotherapy. There's many different chemotherapy drugs, and unfortunately, the toxicity can be pretty significant with that particular type of drug. If we take a look at therapeutic response, because the disease is not curative, and because patients at some point during their treatment will no longer respond, this is something that doctors need to closely monitor patients. So physicians will, and also because of some side effects. So for instance, with the CDK4/6 inhibitors, patients will experience neutropenia. So it is very important that they go and they do blood tests every month. And in those blood tests, they typically look at CBCs, which is really focused on tolerability. They'll do liver function tests. Many or most take a look at tumor markers, but they're really focused on disease burden. And where we come into play is cell proliferation, like Anders was talking about before. The benefit that we have is that when that cell proliferation is low, it's an indicator that patients are responding to CDK4/6 inhibitors. And this is what really excites physicians significantly. Also during the diagnostic period as well, patients are, of course, asked about signs and symptoms and imaging. And imaging has really been the gold standard, really looking at CT scan, bone scans, and PET scans. But, speaking with radiologists, it's very tough. They're taking a look at a cross section of a tumor and then trying to understand, what is that, how has that disease burden really changed? So even talking to radiologists, they believe that DiviTum is a pretty significant tool that they could use in their practice as well, along with medical oncologists. So fourth is really the goal, and the goal is to, as I indicated, to extend overall survival and maintain quality of health, or quality of life for the patients. And kind of the four things that we really were able to get out of physicians, and we did market research with a number of different medical oncologists, one-on-one interviews. But the four things were really, one is how to keep patients on CDK4/6 therapies as long as possible, because they are efficacious. And this is something that DiviTum is such an early indicator that when that value does go past a particular threshold, then physicians can employ some things that will help to try to understand what it is, why that patient might not be responding, or keep a close eye on them, potentially dose adjust, things of that nature. The second thing is really determining if a patient is responding to a therapy, and this is something we heard consistently from medical oncologists was, we put a patient on this therapy, but we don't really know if they're responding for a duration of time, and if we could use DiviTum as a tool to help us understand if the thymidine kinase value goes down, that would be hugely beneficial to us managing that particular patient. The other is, kind of the degree of disease progression and what warrants a switch in therapy. And we were speaking with a radiologist, and they said, we'll have situations where lesions in a certain part of the body are larger or growing, and lesions in other part of the body are actually getting smaller. And we don't know what call to make here. And a product like DiviTum will certainly help out. And I think the other is, and this is a big one, is being able to predict whether a patient is going to respond to the therapy and for what duration of time. And there's a clinical study out called BioItaly. And what we can do there is we can take a look at the baseline of thymidine kinase, day 15 and day 28, and we're able to predict whether a patient's gonna respond for roughly 13 months, 22 months-ish, or in excess of 36 months. And this was, again, another utility of DiviTum that medical oncologists were very, very interested in, because they want to be able to identify and segment those patients that are coming into their office where they know they're going to have to pay some special attention to. Next slide, please. So our customer-facing team that we've hired, these are people with a significant amount of experience. I think combined they have over 130 years of experience. These folks have held positions as sales reps, sales directors, national account managers, strategic account managers, market access, managed market. They really understand the complete sales process within the specialty diagnostic area. They've also obviously won a whole number of awards in their career, and they're very, very seasoned. And the reason why we wanted to bring this caliber of person into the organization is as we scale the business, we're going to build teams around these folks so that we already have kind of the leadership in place. This will be beneficial to the culture when we bring people in around these folks. And it should be a seamless process. And these folks are very experienced in launching also disruptive products, products that are not Me Too products. They're very experienced in targeting specialty physicians as well. So unlike calling on standard, family practitioners and things of this nature, they know how to navigate through the specialty physician kind of landscape to be able to get access to these folks. Also selling high value tests. Most of these people have had experience at selling tests in the couple $1,000 range. So selling a $400 test ish, with Biovica, I think is something very, very, very manageable. I'm also negotiating contracts with institutions. So this will be a big part of our business, negotiating contracts with NCCN, NCI, academic institutions, general reference labs, things of that nature. These folks are very experienced in that. And also leading in-service events. So, when you meet with a physician, you don't just meet with a physician, you meet with the back office as well. And you want to make sure that they're trained on how to order the product, what the test result looks like. You want to take a look to understand what the interpretation guide looks like. How do you manage a sample when a patient comes in, things of that nature. So they're very experienced across the board. So we're very, very lucky to be able to have these individuals starting soon in the organization. Next slide, please. So the methodology that we take, so we don't just have these folks go out and knock on doors of hospitals. We take a very strategic and sophisticated approach to where do we actually want to grow our business. So when we take a look at the number of patients with metastatic breast cancer, it's roughly about 168,000 patients. When we take a look at the number of oncologists that have written prescriptions, so one of our targeting approaches is we've acquired prescription data. So in the US, because every physician has a medical license and the medical license is associated with every prescription, we're able to go through and acquire this data so that we know how many oncologists actually ordered CDK4/6, when they ordered CDK4/6 over the last 12 months, how many patients they have. So in this particular case, we know there's about 7,500 oncologists, medical oncologists that ordered CDK4/6. It's a great surrogate for us to take a look at to understand where our customer base is. But in looking at that, about 10% or about 750 wrote approximately 50% of all of those prescriptions. So as you can see, instead of calling on a medical oncologist that might have only wrote 20 prescriptions, you would rather spend your time as a salesperson calling on somebody that wrote 400 prescriptions. So this is kind of the first piece of our targeting methodology. Then we take a look at our existing KOL relationships. We take a look at our relationships with NCI and NCCN centers. We also take a look at, where the high density areas are, because the last thing you want is sales folks spending a lot of time on airplanes or behind windshields. So we take that into account. We also take a look at payer mix. So part of the data that we acquired, we also acquired payer data, which means we know that a particular institution, what percentage is paid by private insurance versus public insurance, and then it breaks all the private insurance down, and we know some private insurance are more likely to pay the current, the amounts that we're charging, and others you have to negotiate a bit more about. So we take that into account when we target. And then we also take a look at who has the highest propensity to establish client bill business. So this is the business where we would contract with an institution, they would send us samples, we would send them the results, and then they would do the billing. So we take all of these things into account and provide that information, a targeting list to our customer-facing team, and that gives us the best opportunity for success in the marketplace. Next slide, please, Anders. So from a sales strategy perspective, we really are both consultative, and we both take a consultative and a clinical approach to positioning DiviTum. And it's very important to understand that oncologists, each oncologist can have definitely a different patient mix. So you might have oncologists that are focused on kind of the geriatric side of patients. You might have younger patients. You might have patients that are more, in a more, I guess, influential. Other ones that might maybe in a rural setting. So they all have a bit of different needs. They also manage, as I indicated, the patient sample logistics. So when a patient comes in, they're going to have a sample drawn and sent to our laboratory. Here, the rep will make sure that those particular institutions or doctors' offices have sample collection kits, which we have. They have prepaid shipping, FedEx shipping, postage. We make it very simple and straightforward for those samples that come directly back to our lab. We also train the physician and the back office on financial assistance programs. So we want to make sure that when a patient comes in, they're not going to be burdened with a large bill. We want to make sure that it's seamless for them to be able to take a look to make sure they qualify for financial assistance and that we can process any fees correctly. And then probably one of the most important things is being able to sit down with the physician or the healthcare provider and going over the patient results. So as part of the call, when a salesperson goes in to meet with a physician, one of the things we do is we also pull up identified test reports and talk through with the physician results that have come back. And oftentimes physicians want to know, hey, how is another local institution managing patients like this, or we help with connecting those particular doctors. But very, very important additive service that we offer. The other side of our customer-facing team is the senior directors of market access. These folks are focused directly on contracting with institution, and this is a very important part of our business. So, and when they contract with institutions, they focus on the healthcare providers that are affiliated with those institutions. So for instance, if we have a salesperson focusing on UCLA, we would have a senior director of market access focus on contracting with UCLA or the whole UC system in California. What that does for us is that helps the ordering process for the product, and it also sets up the fact that there's a payment process already established. So it's much easier for us to be able to get paid and paid on terms that we're looking for. Then the second thing that they really focus on as well is on the regional payer side of things. So not only do they contract with institutions, but they also work with insurance companies directly, and also large employers also, because we want to make sure, you know, employers are able to dictate to insurance companies if they want particular services for their patients. So this is another thing that these folks focus on. Next slide, please. So reimbursement is really broken into three different categories, and we work on all three simultaneously. One is public insurance. So about 50% of our business will go directly through Medicare. So day one of launch, we will work immediately what's called a Medicare administrative contractor. They're the contracting arm of Medicare. And we work closely with them, do a tech assessment, and either work towards getting a local coverage determination or what's called a PLA code through a national coverage determination. So this process we will initiate. Once you're able to get a PLA code, that's where you negotiate the price for the product, what you get reimbursed, and you're on a national fee schedule. So any patient that has Medicare qualifies for DiviTum, and that's about 50% of the total market. So that's a real priority for our business. The second is this value-based collaboration. So this is really the client bill. This is the work that we do with institutions individually, where we contract with them and we are able to get paid based on what we negotiate on time. So typically it's 30 to 45 days net. But it also opens up an avenue for us to be able to get draw fees. So it opens up an avenue so patients can get their blood drawn. And there's also a lower cost of sample acquisition because these institutions pay for shipping to be able to get the sample back to our laboratory as well. The third is private insurance, and private insurance is where we would bill insurance companies directly. We would provide medical necessity information, and here we would also exercise an appeals process until we were able to get an established code for our particular product. Next slide, please. So lastly, we are running this out of our CLIA lab. We have established a laboratory in San Diego, California. We've done the submission to California Department of Public Health, and we anticipate getting our CLIA certificate any day. You know, when I take a look at all the probably biggest, most successful diagnostic companies that have high value, unique products, this is exactly how they as well launch their products. And it's for a number of different reasons. And there's some critical success factors, one of which is really owning the relationships with the patients, physicians, and payers, which this allows you to do. It also allows you to manage the reimbursement process, as I just previously discussed. It provides access. So any physician out there, any hospital institution out there that wants to run DiviTum can, and that's, I think, is hugely beneficial. We will also collect patient consent with the samples, which means that we will be able to bank these samples and use them for future pipeline development opportunities, which is incredibly important to us. And lastly is data mining. So every single sample that we run, we're going to have clinical information with it, and we'll be able to understand, cutoffs. We'll be able to understand, the utility, other utilities. We'll be able to understand decision-making processes from physicians, but this is hugely important to us as well. And with that being said, I think, Anders, that's my last slide.
All right, thank you very much, Warren. So I will just go in and make a short summary before we open up for a Q&A, or it's already open. You can submit questions using the form which is in your Teams application, and we have some questions I can see. All right, so to summarize it, so we have a product with a purpose that can make a difference for the patients and improve the lives for cancer patients. And it's a DiviTum that measures cell proliferation, and we measure that from a simple blood sample. So it's easy, convenient, especially in the metastatic setting when you take several samples over time. This is also something which is important. It addresses an important currently unmet clinical need to do this easy, convenient, and to be able to quickly provide feedback. This is also acknowledged by key opinion leading ones that we within the world, within the field, that we have collaborated with, and together with them, we have generated a solid foundation of data proving the value and the potential of the product. And the market potential is also large, more than $2 billion per year within the monitoring of the metastatic cancer area for the key indications of the key markets. If we talk about milestones, I think a big one we just passed previously this year is the 510(k) clearance, which enables us to launch the product on the single biggest market, the US market. And we have also one which is ongoing, which is an enabler for that as well. That's the capital injection in order to support the launch of the product. And looking at the remaining of 2022, we are looking to get our CLIA lab certifications so that we can offer the product as a service in the US, and thereby we'll also launch the product for clinical use in the US. During 2023, we will apply for a PLA code, and we will also starting to make agreements with US hospital for that direct bill channel that Warren talked about in the presentation. During 24, you can expect to see also Medicare coverage, which is a very important milestone, as more than 50% of the patients are covered by Medicare in the US. For us to reach the milestone by end of 2025, 3 years after launch of the product, that we should be able to realize 15% of the market potential for the product on the US market. And if you look at Europe, we also have an ambition to launch a product on selected markets in Europe using partners during the beginning of 2023. So with that, I open up for the Q&A session. I'd like to remind you again that if you want to remain anonymous, don't forget to click that checkbox to post as anonymous. So let me switch over to the questions, and let me first start with the first one I see here. There's one saying, what kind of, I'll publish it so you can see it as well. What kind of competitors are you facing at launch and over time or in the future? Maybe I can start, maybe you can compliment me, Warren. So the unmet need within this area is partly defined by the fact that there is a lack of diagnostics to provide quick and efficient feedback on treatment decision. So currently it's imaging and it's some legacy biomarkers within this field. This creates an opportunity for us to offer something that's superior to what's already out there, and we will be complementary to that. Over time, of course, after successful launch, we expect new entrants to that field, and so we need to constantly improve and develop our products, which our CLIA lab also offers us an excellent opportunity to do with a sample biobank that will build over time, and the access to the patient clinical status that we will get at the time as well. That's the high level. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Warren.
No, I think you addressed that perfectly. I think the big issue here is that there is not a direct competitor per se. When we've spoken with medical oncologists, they've all indicated that DiviTum is an additive tool for them to help manage the care of their patients, I think, which is very significant.
Yeah, great. I got another good question, which is around gross margins. What kind of gross margin overall are you expecting? And we have not disclosed in details the gross margin for the product, but we've set some guidance, and we've said that typically within this field, the gross margins are high, more than 80% for these type of products, and that's valid for us as well. Because the reagents, the components of the project is not especially costly. The big investment is to bringing it to the market. And so we have a high gross margin, over 80%, especially on the average price, selling price of $400 that we are planning for, and also have verified, like we previously spoke about. All right, so we have more questions coming in. That's great. This is a good one. I'll publish this, and maybe Warren, you can help me answer this because it's a US one. I read it, and maybe you can answer. Thanks for the presentation. How eager are the cancer centers in America that took part in the studies, for instance, the Mayo Clinic, to include DiviTum in their daily operations? So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, Warren. And you're on mute now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so everybody we've collaborated with has been very, very receptive, obviously, to DiviTum, and they definitely want to use it in their clinical practice. So I think certainly at time of launch, we're going to definitely see many of these collaborations start using the product. Typically what happens with these institutions is they will use it, and once they start using it, then at some point they adopt it in their clinical pathway. So each institution has their own clinical pathway, which is a guideline for the institution. So based on the feedback that we've received from the key opinion leaders, I think the adoption will come fairly quickly.
That's great. We have two more. They are kind of related to the previous ones, so I'll publish them both. And I think this one will be interesting to hear your answer on, Warren. How will you leverage your strong key opinion leader network from your clinical collaboration? And this one, how? No, that was not the one I was. Here you go. This was the one that was related. And how could you please give a little bit more color on the commercial agreements and major US hospitals, and how long will it take until you have 35 hospitals signed? That's a good one.
Okay, so let me try to answer the first one with the key opinion leaders. So with key opinion leaders, they're very influential nationally and especially regionally. So how we work those relationships is when we get adoption from those key opinion leaders where they're using DiviTum, we go out to those high prescribers, like I had indicated in my presentation, and we share the fact that that particular KOL or that particular institution is adopting or using our product. And that's very beneficial in being able to get adoption for DiviTum in areas where, quite frankly, medical oncologists want to see what the KOL is using, what the big institution is using, and things of that nature. So it's very, very, very important that we immediately get key opinion leaders on board, get them using the product, and then we do leverage the fact that they're using the product to be able to get further adoption, and then it kind of stair steps down with that as well. So that's the first side of things. Secondarily, the question around how about commercial contracts, how do they work, and then how long does it take to get 35 commercial contracts in place. The commercial contracts, they're typically called client bill contracts. What we do is we work with institutions, and the real benefit of hiring this team of people that we've brought in is they have a vast network of relationships with NCCN and NCI designated centers where they've had existing relationships with, and they've been successful contracting. So how it works is with these contracts is that the organization themselves, they will send us their samples. So as samples come into that particular institution, that institution sends us those particular samples. They'll do the blood draw, they pay for the shipping, they send that to us. We run the sample, report the sample back out to the ordering institution, and then we invoice them, and then they pay us for services rendered. So then we don't have to go through private insurance per se to be able to get paid for those particular samples. That's kind of the high level of how those contracts work. In regards to getting 35, I couldn't commit to that right this minute because I don't know.
In the minutes.
I can tell you the contracting side is an extremely high priority within our organization. So it's a focus, but I could not commit to an exact number over a time period, but it is a high priority.
We have a related one, Warren. I think you already somewhat indirectly answered it. And the question is, how long do you think it will take until the first private insurance in the US is signed? And you answered with the direct bill, you indirectly sign because you will be able to invoice through the partner that you have a direct bill agreement with. But if you give some guidance on direct with private insurance, could you say something about that?
Sure, absolutely. So with private insurance, there's a lot of private insurance companies in the US. There's typically kind of 6 or 7 very large ones, and then there's hundreds, if not over 1,000, very small insurance companies. Typically with the very large insurance companies, once you get Medicare coverage, there's a couple of those that typically will cover your product as well with Medicare coverage. Other very large insurance companies will really want to see your product written into clinical guidelines such as NCCN guidelines. However, when you typically get Medicare coverage, those smaller regional insurance companies will actually provide coverage for your product. So the process that we're faced with is we focus on Medicare first. We focus on all of them, but typically what happens is you get Medicare first, then you get into clinical guidelines, and then you get the largest insurance companies, payers to cover your product. But the strategy here is that in working directly with these client bill or direct bill accounts, these hospitals, when you sign agreements with them, they do the billing to private insurance. So, it's one way to navigate through this kind of highly complex reimbursement system.
All right. Very good. Well, I think that concludes our session. Thank you very much for listening in, and thank you for all the good questions. And if you for some reason have not been able to ask questions, or if you have more questions, you should feel welcome to send your questions to IR for Investor Relations at biovica.com, and we'll respond to the question via email as well. So thank you very much for your interest and in Biovica, and that concludes this call.